Greetings, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We're going to be speaking about 5 ways to improve business agility by cleaning up your ITSM platforms. So thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today. I'm just going to give this a few seconds to make sure everybody can get in, and then we'll get started right away. I'm sure many of you in the United States are looking forward to your holiday weekend coming up. We're just a week away from the Thanksgiving holiday. So happy Thanksgiving to everybody. And again, you're joining today's webinar. It's on 5 ways to improve business agility by cleaning up your ITSM tools. And I promise you, we do have 5 areas. It's going to be educational and useful for everybody to learn about different ways to clean up and improve and get ready for 2023. Geez, it's hard to say that. But thank you again for joining today's webinar. And my name is Isaac Sokolik. I lead a company called Star CIO, and I'll tell you about that in a little bit of a second. Just going to give it one more second here to make sure we get everybody here, last minute joiners, and then we'll get started at exactly 2 minutes after. Again, you're joining the webinar sponsored by ISOS Technology and by Atlassian, and our webinar topic today is 5 ways to improve business agility by cleaning up your ITSM platforms. Thank you for taking time today out of your busy schedule to join us and learn something. If you're up to it, say hello in the chat window and let us know where you're coming in from. My name is Isaac Sokolik. I'm the president of Star CIO. I also have 2 books out, Driving Digital, and a new book called Digital Trailblazer. I've been a CTO and a CIO for 20 years, doing a mix of Agile and DevOps and ITSM, and how to bring all those together. And to give you a sense why we chose to talk about this today, you think about any tool that's a critical part of your workflow. You start building up its capabilities, you start using it, you start using some things more and some things less. You start adding fields to it, you start making the workflow a little bit more robust. And at some point you want to take a step back and say, are there things that we need to do to clean this up, to make it easier for end users, whether it's employees opening a ticket or it's people on the help desk, service desk responding to tickets. So every once in a while, we want to take a pause and clean up our environments. We're trying to become a little bit more agile with our businesses. That means if there's opportunities to create services where they weren't services before, if we have multiple platforms, there's an opportunity to consolidate. If we're planning to do mergers or acquisitions, there's an opportunity there again to make sure our environment is ready to bring new users and new services on in a rapid way. So we'll be talking a lot about that. If you read my recent blog post on the ISOS website, I talked about how we think about cleaning up. And you think about the holidays, when we clean up for the holidays, first thing we do is we clean up the mess, we vacuum the floors, we get things dusted, we put things away. We start thinking about reconfiguring the house for the number of guests that we're going to have. So we put the number of chairs in, we get the place decorated. And then in the middle of this, we're also thinking about how do we set up the environment, how do we set up the room for our future needs, right? We're going to go into a long holiday period and then into our winters here in the United States for most places. And we start thinking about, well, what's the configuration we want to be ready for? So that's how we think about cleaning up. That will be a theme that we use today. We're going to be talking about 5 ways to improve business agility to clean up your ITSM environment. And if you work in IT operations or you're on the service desk, you're in DevOps and you have a ops responsibility, or you're an IT leadership, I think this is a webinar you're going to learn a lot from. So again, thank you for joining. Before we get started and I introduce my panelists, just a little bit of housekeeping and about this webinar. First is, yes, we are recording it, so just be aware of that. The recording will be shared after the live webinar, so if you have to break for something, you can get access to this. We will be answering questions, and I invite you to put your very specific or detailed or just a generic question in the the Q&A panel that's at the bottom of your screen, and we will try to answer every single question that comes up, or the folks at ISOS will come back and find a way to get you an answer to your question. So please use this. We have a number of experts on our call today that can help you with this question of how do we clean up our environments. I want to use this moment now to introduce you to my panelists. First up is Dan Wilson. Dan Wilson is the Senior Professional Services Lead Consultant at ISOS Technology. Dan, say hello to everybody and tell us about yourself.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I've been with ISOS Technology for 3 years now, and I've been working in the Atlassian environment for about 5 years. Recently, my focus has been on migrations and ITSM implementations using JSM.
Super. Dan, thanks for joining us. And then second up is Brian Mertens. Hello, Brian. Brian is a managed services lead over at ISOS Technology. What does that mean, Brian? Tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, thanks, Isaac. Well, so first of all, I've been supporting Atlassian about the same amount of time as Dan. I've been at ISOS for about 1.5 years, and managed services is a way for us to basically support our clients that are already using the Atlassian stack. So we work with them to make sure that their tools are in tip-top shape.
Super. And our third guest today, Nishant Sasi. He is a senior solutions engineer over at Atlassian. He's an engineer, he's solutions. Nishant, you're going to be on the hot seat to provide some of the technical answers that come up in our Q&A panel here. Say hello and tell us what you do over at Atlassian.
Hey, hello everyone. This is Nishant Shashi here. I am an ITSM person for 15 years. Been doing ITSM, helping customers with kind of like lean, agile ways of working, meaningful ITSM practices. So I'm excited today to be here and talking to all of you on that subject.
Excellent. So welcome everybody again. We're talking about 5 ways to improve business agility by cleaning up your ITSM tools. And I'm going to get to the very first one right off the bat. And the way I'll describe this situation is you look at the environment for your employees, the forms that they're using to open a request or to raise an incident. And what I find in organizations that I work with is very often some of these forms have lots and lots of fields on them. They're coming from the perspective of IT trying to get as much information as they can around the problem or the request. So they create a lot of different fields to be able to capture all of that. And then the other problem that might come up is not enough fields, right? I put in a subject, I put in a description, the request comes in and I have very little information about this. So Dan, tell us a little bit about this. Why is this a problem and how should we think about this as an opportunity to clean things up?
Sure. Yeah, those are the 2 scenarios that do cause issues. Quite often when there's too many fields on the form, we find it's too much friction. Users don't want to go through and detail out all the pieces that are being asked for. They need to be reduced down to what's the core information needed to solve the problem that's being addressed at that moment. And on the flip side, if you have just a summary and a description, you're going to find you're going to be going back to the well, asking that user again and again, hey, can you tell me a little bit more? Can you tell me a little bit more? So, it's always good to take a step back and make sure you're asking the right questions to solve the problem you're trying to resolve.
Right. And so, you look at all the things that we can do to improve our tools and our services. And, we start thinking about is 3 fields or it's 12 fields. How do we know this is a mess and that we should really focus on that? Brian, you work in the services side. What's your recommendation there in terms of how do we know this is a mess?
Yeah, thanks, Isaac. So first of all, you might just start recognizing some alternative behaviors. Like instead of submitting tickets, people might start reaching out to you in different forms like Slack or instant messaging. They might start calling you directly or, come by your desk or tap you on the shoulder and things like that. Some other behaviors might be that the people that may want to submit a request may perceive submitting that ticket as a bigger problem than actually trying to solve what they're trying to do. So they just might not even submit a ticket. And then another behavior that might come about is people come up with workarounds, and that could cause some challenges. Like that could actually result in more work or inconsistencies in your processes. So, and then just a couple other things, like formally, you might want to try to find out if it's a mess, and you can do that in the form of like a survey. And then that might help you uncover those people that might be trying to solve the problem without actually opening up a ticket. And then you can also informally ask people by, just asking around or listening around the water cooler and things like that.
Yeah, I actually like that last answer, Brian. I mean, if you work in the service desk, maybe you're not the right person to ask, but have a colleague in development or have a colleague in another area remind people to open tickets up when they have requested incidents, and they're going to be the ones hearing from people saying, well, maybe I don't want to do that. It took too long, or it was too hard to do this. So, now I start thinking, Dan, we know it's a problem. How do we start thinking about improving our situation with our request forms and incident forms?
Yeah, as I alluded to a moment ago, you really want to step back and look at your form. Is it giving you the information you need? Are you using the data that's coming in the way you intended? If it's missing the mark, you thought field A would give you the answer to help you solve it, but it really doesn't help in any way. Take it off the form or adjust it to ask the correct question that is going to help you. What's the missing piece of information? Quite often it's a matter of trying to get it into the correct queue as well. Do you have something that indicates that by this keyword or this specific answer to a dropdown, you know which team it should go to? That will help you start getting things resolved to the people that can help.
Yeah, and what also makes me think of, guys, is that when I set up service desks 5, 6, 7 years ago, we were using older tools. They were hard to configure. They took a long time. We had limited people on the service desk. So we tended to put a lot of fields in our forms, knowing that our ability to go make a change was going to be months and months down the road. And we ended up with these very bloated forms. We also ended up with many single-use forms. So Nishant, what are some capabilities inside JSM that are going to make this easier for people to set this up in a more robust way, both for employees and for the service desk?
Sure. Excellent point by Dan and Brian. I'll touch on that in a minute. So what I would like to add here is, so regardless of, there may be instances where you want those to capture those details, right? For example, if it's an HR, for example, you may need to ask those critical questions. So we do have, for those cases, you can leverage the power of forms, which is powered by Performa, which is baked into the product in the Jira Service Management. The advantage there is that you essentially are not creating custom Jira fields. At the same time, alluding to your fact, Isaac, how do you make the users comfortable creating those forms easily, like a Confluence editor, for example, putting those fields and then map the relevant fields which you want for reporting. So you do not bloat the system. At the same time, you're capturing what you need in order to process your issue. The second thing I would like to add here is the power of how you can utilize categorization, for example, so you get minimum information from your customer and then you have the source of truth, which is maybe living in your asset management or CMDB, and then use those values to drive your automation rules, drive your approvals. So you're still capturing enough information, but then you have contextual information within your system to make those decisions. And one thing I would like to say, like Brian mentioned about Slack, how do we, when you adapt Jira Service Management, how can you make it more natural for your end users to have that conversational ticketing piece to come into fruition? There also, you're not asking a bunch of fields with questions. You can, but there you are still making your end customers comfortable. At the same time, you can convert any kind of conversation into a ticketing, which we call conversational ticketing. So there are many ways where you can improve upon as well.
So I'm hearing a few different ways we can tackle this. Number one, making sure you take advantage of forms to create context-specific ways of onboarding, picking the fields in such a way so that you can categorize the problem, maybe not fully solve it in real time, but at least categorize it. And then, start using Slack and other channels like that to integrate and have a conversational input into your system. So lots of different ways to look at this. One of the things that we wanted to do in this webinar is to share information from everybody that's here. So we're going to put up a poll here just to get a sense of, on average, how many fields are on your standard ITSM request form. So many of you may have multiple forms. Pick the one that's most commonly used, maybe about an end user computing issue, maybe about asking for a password change or for getting access to a database or having an application installed. So you take your most common areas and think about how many fields are on that form. Let's just get a voice of crowd here, what your forms look like. And we'll keep this poll open for about 15 more seconds. Let's see if we can do this very quickly. And Megan, I can't see when we have at least a quorum of answers, but when you think you do, let's see the results. Here we go. Okay, so we're in that sort of sweet spot of 4 to 7. The 8 or more starts getting a little bit concerning to me, that situation where you can end up having some of those tickets not being opened and instead going into a tap on the shoulder or a phone call or just not even bringing it to the help desk. So if you're in that 8 or more category, this is something you might want to look at trying to solve for. And even that 1 to 3 category, you made it very easy to onboard for people. It's just like sending an email at that point, but that will lead into our next question, right? Our next area of places that we think about is, now that we've onboarded the tickets, we know what the problem is, or we know what the request is, and now we're starting to think about, how do we resolve the issues? How do we resolve the request quickly? How do we route the ticket to the right teams? And we know if a ticket stays in queue for too long or gets bounced around for too much, we know we're going to have a problem giving an end user a really good experience. So let's talk about this, Brian. How do we think about this? Why is this a problem if we're not routing the tickets efficiently?
Yeah, well, Isaac, actually, you just answered the question, because I think, to me, the obvious answer here is that you're going to have a negative customer experience. You phrase it as a positive customer experience. That's what we want. And if you have tickets that are sitting around a long time, then that requester may be wondering what's going on, and perhaps even not feel valued, or nobody cares about their request. And on the other hand, if that ticket gets bounced around a lot, then they may lose confidence in that service desk and their capabilities. So both of those really end up in that negative customer experience.
Yeah, and that's really the essence of the question here. It's really about, can we get the request in? That was our first issue. And then can we get it routed to the right person? And very often, we set up the tool comes in, it tells us, here's your queue of requests and incidents coming in, and we haven't come up with the rules that says who's really going to go attack this problem and make sure that we respond and resolve the question as fast as we can. So again, Dan, going back to, we have a mess. This is an area we might be able to clean up. How do we know this is a real problem?
Yeah, if we're seeing the ticket is getting bounced from team to team to team, we're losing confidence in our users, as Brian mentioned, but we're also seeing that we're not getting the ticket to the right team first. We need to make sure that the right team has the training and they get to see the issue quickly so they can resolve it in a timely manner. And then the SLAs are going to be our other tool that we're going to watch. If we're getting close to breaching or actually breaching several SLAs, then we're going to know that we either need to check our routing or maybe do some additional training of our team.
And Nishant, are there capabilities inside Atlassian to help us get a pulse of customer and understand this?
Yes, we do have customer satisfaction as a way to measure how well the customer are satisfied with the service we are giving. So what I usually recommend our customers, our teams, right? no team should strive for, aim for perfection on day one, right? So it's always best practice to actually have blameless feedback so that you could design your service catalog and improve upon continuously. And that's what you should strive for. If it goes to another team, that's okay. Track that. Do not move the ticket. Track where is origination, where it's landing. Track why it's happening in the first place, and then design your service catalog in a better shape or form, and that will improve over time. That's my recommendation.
Yeah, I agree with that, Nishant. I mean, the same way we want people to open the ticket up so that we can track the end-to-end response around that. If that, inside the service desk, we want to be able to track how that the request was serviced. That's one of the indicators that we can use to improve our overall process. So Brian and Nishant, let's start with Brian. Give us some tips. How do we clean this up? How do we make sure that the right people are getting the right ticket and that we're resolving them efficiently?
Yeah. So first of all, I mean, we kind of touched on the fact that routing is really important in making sure it gets to ideally the right person first. So you just need to do some evaluation analysis on what's happening, and you may need to make adjustments. For example, you might need to add a field to help with the routing, right? So just kind of take a deeper dive into the routing processes there. Another thing is you might want to consider round robin assignments just to make sure that those tickets are getting assigned quickly. Another idea is that you could set up alerts, especially for tickets that are approaching or have already breached your SLAs. And then another idea is that you might just need to set some expectations. So I think it's helpful to post your SLAs somewhere, or even consider sending some automated communications that might include your SLAs as well. So those are some ideas to help with cleaning that up.
There's really good tips there. Nishant, what do you want to add here?
The thing I want to add here is maybe piggybacking from my previous statement, right? It is very vital for any service management practice to be a service conscious platform. What do I mean by that, right? So you essentially define your services, right? And then you map it to things like, who does this service belongs to? Who's my support group? Who's my change manager? Which CI/CD pipeline does this service connect to, right? What does this do? It actually reduces the friction between teams. It does, especially around, when you look at dev and ops teams, right? It does help a lot there. It also embraces the culture of collaboration when it comes to service management, which is pretty much missing and siloed when you look at most of the practices out there. And that's what we are trying to unlock. And how you can do it, perhaps by automation, right? Use the power of automation. For example, if you want to auto-create some of the issues which is originating as a critical to the dev team's backlog item as a bug, go ahead and do that automation so that you can, again, improving and at each iteration how you want to do it, and start small and then build on that.
Yeah, Nishant, I like that story because it's just so common. Somebody calls up the help desk, raises a question or an issue about a proprietary application. It's a ticket in JSM. They assign it to the right DevOps team. It shows up either as an RFI or as a DevOps on Jira in the team's backlog. They respond to it. They address the issue. Maybe they even do a release against that defect that auto triggers back into the ticket and saying that we've completed this ticket. Here's the release and the release notes around this. So these are not hard things to do. The automations are pretty easy to set up, but you just have to think through the end-to-end flow. How do we route the ticket to the right people? And then going back to our first recommendation, are you collecting enough information to be able to route it efficiently? So let's talk about, we just dropped a lot of different options for you, inside JSM to be able to handle what you're implementing. So we're up for our second poll here. that we're going to get up here. This is check as many as you apply. What have you implemented in your ITSM tool? And this is again to share with everybody on the group. We have a good number of people here today, just showing where the maturity is in terms of different capabilities that you're using. If you're using 2 of these, click 2. If you're using more of these, please do tell us what you're using. And tell your colleagues what you're using, and you get a sense of, what's the most common types of capabilities that people are implementing inside JSM to make sure that there's a great employee experience, but that we're addressing issues reliably and efficiently. So Megan, when we get a critical mass here, you can show us up the results from here. And I'm wondering if we're going to be surprised here, Nishant. We should have taken bets to see what we're going to see here. Here we go.
Let's see.
SLA definitions is high. About 77% of you are using this. So I applaud that. Good job. Let's see what's number 2 in here. Asset management. That's clearly, we're not going to cover this detail in here, but I've never seen anybody say that their CMDB is highly accurate and being used effectively. So plenty of room to clean up in there. And what's number here is, looks like 54% ticket routing automations. A big way you can clean up, again, the number of fields that you're collecting is that recognizing that you can use mapping, you can use routing inside automations to do a lot of the work that Forms was doing in the old days, where you had to collect a lot of information upfront manually. So good job. And 23% of you are using Slack and Teams integration. So even some of the newer capabilities, Nishant is happy to see that. So great job. And let's move into our third area. Again, we're talking about 5 ways to improve business agility by cleaning up your ITSM platforms. And this one is, we're going to talk about other workflows, other platforms. When I talk to the folks at ISOS, we use the word migration in a lot of different ways as a way of bringing all of the service capabilities into one way of working. And Dan, we use the word migration a lot. So give us a flavor of the different types of migrations that teams here might want to consider going into next year.
Yeah, quite often a migration is considered to be, from server to cloud. You see that happen a lot. Teams have been working in Jira on their on-prem instance, and now they're ready to move into the new options that Atlassian is providing. Some of the migrations that are less thought of are the spreadsheets and emails. There's a lot of people tracking their assets through spreadsheets or back and forth through emails, and those things do fall through the tracks and cracks, and picking those up and putting them into an ITSM solution really helps stop that leak. Third-party applications are yet another area that we look at. The ServiceNow is one that we do. Sharewell has been coming up quite a bit lately, and bringing those people onto the JSM platform. They've experienced a great lift there.
Yeah, and Dan, let's just follow this up. Like, how do we think about getting our environment set up and clean so that we're able to do migrations efficiently?
Good hygiene. Going back to your article that you wrote earlier, it's going in and making sure that you have the data you need in your system and start removing the stuff that's no longer relevant. Quite often people have hoarded data and drug it around, and they're realizing, hey, I've got 10 years of data. I no longer need this. Let that go, and let's move to the cloud and start fresh. Get rid of those dirty dishes. And then again, start preparing for the future. How do you want it to run your team in the future? And let's start aligning our systems to support that. Server is coming to end of life, and we need to make sure that everyone's aware of that and get to the cloud or to the data center before you lose that support.
What's the date on that, Dan?
End of life is February 15th, 2024.
Wow. Okay. So if I'm, running a major on-prem environment and I still have that in there, I'm thinking I better have this budgeted and prioritized in 2023 to have a seamless experience going from the on-prem version to all the advantages that the cloud has to offer. And so now I'm thinking about a migration. Nishant, what are some of the gotchas, some of the things that if I just roll up the sleeves and ask my my one person in IT who knows how to configure JSM, go do a migration in here. What are some of the gotchas that happen here?
Okay, so partners like ISOs are the experts in migration, but when it comes to looking at the approach, oftentimes customers do not realize is that in Jira Service Management, we take a little bit different approach when it comes to service management. When I say this, we are more team-centric. So Atlassian embrace the value of teams, and that's the reason we wanted it to be team-centric again versus practice-centric. So most of the other traditional ITSM tools out there, the BMCs, the ServiceNows, Sharewells, they're more of a practice-centric, where you have, when I say practice-centric, incident management, right? Change management, asset management, and then the groups subscribe to it, right? In Jira Service Management, it's the other way around. You have teams, you have an HR team, you have an operations team, you have a tech team, right? They have their own service desk. They can dictate what services they want to give to their customers. Maybe HR just deals with service requests, right? IT might deal with incidents, changes, and problems at the same time. So giving what I love to call like autonomy to the teams at the same time with alignment. So autonomy with alignment is very critical. And this actually unlocks the new ways of working when it comes to the high velocity ITSM. That's something we need to be very vocal to our customers and also embrace what are the advantages. And I'm seeing really great stories from customers using the new ways of working when it comes to TSM.
Great. And so Dan and Brian, help me out here. I don't want to necessarily lift and shift the existing environment and just have the same problems in the new environments, nor do I want to like completely re-engineer from scratch and change everything that we're doing. You do a lot of migrations, a lot of consolidations over at ISOs. What are some of the things that you try to do safely during one of these migrations that start exposing some of the benefits once you get into your landing zone on the cloud and in a consolidated environment?
Yeah, for many migrations, we want to do a like for like. So we do sit down and partner with the client to understand, are you wanting to consolidate this before the migration or after? And we're looking at what features they're wanting to take advantage of. You know, if they are wanting to get into asset management with in the newly renamed Asset from Insight tool for CMDB, it's probably better to build that in the cloud once they do their migration rather than trying to build it on-prem and migrate up. That'll simplify it. We also want to look at advanced roadmaps. You know, getting into the cloud, they'll be able to start doing some alignment of their teams and reducing those number of projects and making sure corporate initiatives are being highlighted and helped through.
Yep. And Nishant, you have a couple, we talked about this offline, you have a couple very interesting points here about some things to think about as you're migrating. Why don't you share that with everybody?
Sure. One thing I always believe is that people are the most important factor here. Who is this people I'm talking about, right? So people are the end users, right? We are serving them at the end of the day as a service desk. So when they move from another system, we need to make them comfortable. And how do we do that? So we can have several accelerators. One of the things I can think about is about how do you continuously improve self-service? Most companies or most organizations may be using some kind of knowledge base, right? Can be used by Confluence, most cases Confluence, but so how can you better put those knowledge articles in so that it eases them into your tool? Right? Give them all the ammunition you need. I'm not saying have the full-fledged knowledge base from day one, but take steps proactively so that your customers, when it comes to your service desk, they're like, I'm getting self-served here. I'm getting better customer service, and that's what you want to strive for. Looking at the customer's lens. If you do that, you reduce the tribal knowledge, which I borrowed the statement from Dan, and happy customers at the end of the day.
Yeah, Nishant, I mean, there's a couple things there. that I'll accent, but I do want to bring up the poll again. We have a third poll here. This is the last one to share with everyone, just so that you feel like you're not alone. Look at next year, right? Look at these opportunities of bring and upgrading your JSM to handle these different use cases. My favorite one here is spreadsheets and emails to the IT service management desk. This can happen for all sorts of reasons. I find there's data science groups, there's marketing groups that are service oriented, upgrade a report, create a report, build out a new PDF for the sales group, and they're still taking them by email and they're still managing them through a spreadsheet. So opportunities to expand the scope of what you're doing within your tools there. Share with us what your opportunities are, what your environment looks like, and you'll see that your peers are working through the same issues. Megan, you can bring that up as you do, and a couple things off of Nishant's response that I think are worth highlighting here, right? If you find that 30% of your tickets are showing up in a certain set of categories, that's a great example to go and think about creating self-service capabilities around them. We've become a lot more used to being able to do that. And when you see something like we have a single set of tickets going to one person, or two people, right? The tribal knowledge, only one person knows how to service this. This is another opportunity to say like how we can get something documented, get something cross-trained so that more people can address it. No surprise here, spreadsheets and emails to the service desk as the number one. I think this is a problem that everybody faces that they need to chip at, but very common, right? You do an acquisition, you grow a team, you end up with multiple tools in the environment. It takes time to find the energy, bandwidth, sometimes funding to be able to consolidate these things. But if you take a two-step approach, let's clean up our environment, and then let's look at the opportunity to consolidate. Now you have a clean environment to move off to. You'll find that working with partners like ISOs, you have a real opportunity to improve the experience for your employees, improve the experience for IT services, and then deliver some business value. So let's go into our fourth area. And just a reminder for everybody, we are taking questions. We're looking for your questions. You can try to stump the panel with some of your more difficult issues. Nishant is here as an Atlassian representative, so we're going to assume he knows all the technical answers, or that he will follow up with you. So if you have something going on in your environment, let us know. Consolidations is about looking back in the past and saying, what's our opportunity to consolidate? Here, we're going to be talking about preparing our environment, knowing that some of your organizations are going to do mergers and acquisitions over the next few years. They may have 2, 3, 4 of them lined up. IT is often the last group to know about an acquisition coming up. We may not know the magnitude of it. We may not know the timing of it, but we may be able to get prepared for it, right? If we know that there's acquisitions in place. So Nishant, I'm going to give you this question first. What can the service desk do to be prepared to handle M&A more efficiently?
I know this may sound like a little bit untraditional, but one of the ways I had one of the customers really accelerated is like having a service desk for a service desk. So you induct a new company, right? So and then how do you have a quick setup guide for your incoming teams who wants to adapt a new tool, right? So you could help them, so you can automate all those processes. They could come in and say, these are the things I need. These are the practices I would like to. You can have that, create a project for them end to end, so that for them as a new user of the platform, it's much more seamless. And at the same time, you are also giving the power to the team, right? So once the project is actually set up, service desk is actually on the process of setting it up, they also learn. So remember the term I used before, like autonomy with alignment? We are still giving that power to the user. So that will help accelerate some of the M&A interaction. So have the best practice guide template and go for it.
And Dan, I mean, you do this a lot at ISOS. What are some of the tactical things that you're looking for when you're doing one of these, getting ready for an acquisition and consolidating?
Whenever we're doing merges, typically it includes, JSW software projects as well as service management, and we always start with the users. And some of the bigger challenges we've faced is whenever the client has acquired a second company and they've started bringing those users into both instances. So we're trying to merge those together, and we have multiple user accounts for the same person. That can get very messy very quickly. And so we encourage users to, kind of take their time, make sure that they've evaluated how they want to bring these together, and that we don't, jump too quick on bringing users into systems. That will always give us a clean runway to help get them merged together.
And Brian, looking at this from a services perspective, is this a, sort of like one shot fits all, we're going to move everything over at once, or is this done over some kind of roadmap? How do you guys think about this?
Yeah, so likely you're not going to move everything over at once. I mean, theoretically it's possible, but usually you don't. And so you really want to prioritize in that case. So you want to prioritize your service offerings and make sure you're in alignment with, the strategy and the integration plan that's happening. And so you're probably going to move the most critical, the highest priority services first, and then you'll move the rest later, or you perhaps not even move them at all. And another comment that I want to make, it's surrounding all of this, is that with any change, right, communication is absolutely critical. And so I would recommend documentation, possibly even training if it's needed, for those that are going to be going through the change, especially the end users.
Exactly. So, I think about the spectrum. I have some things I might want to move over very quickly. Maybe it's end user computing, maybe it's, AD migration, it's access to email. And then there's other services, there's a service group supporting the ERP and the CRM. It's going to take 6 months, maybe even longer before we do anything with those things. We're going to be living in some kind of hybrid world for a while. Maybe I'm going to use JSM portal so I can route some of the migrated servers over to JSM and some others to the legacy system for a bit of period of time. Lots of different things that you can really roadmap this out so it doesn't hit you all at once. Nishant, help me out here to finish this off. How can we plan for this? If we know that over the next year we're going to do 3 or 4 acquisitions, what would you advise the IT services to do within JSM to be best prepared to handle these?
So one thing, I would like to add here is like, it's not just, companies looking for M&A. So any company can be acquired, or, they in the future, we can never predict it, right? So having structure to your ITSM practices talks a lot about IT hygiene, which you will have going forward when you have M&A. What I mean by that is like, if you have, if you can reduce the number of very specific jargons, which is understood only by your organization, for example. So when you join 2 service desks, let's say IT service desk, there may be a lot of confliction. So how do we reduce that? As well as one thing I would like, again, stress is like, it's just not inducting a new team, you're also inducting their customers, right? We need to think about how the customer would react to the new ways of working. How can you ease them into? Do we need 2 portals at the front? Maybe we do. Maybe we can just have 1 portal, and then in the transition phase, maybe for 6 months to a year, it can take, right? With large organization, you could have a pathway to actually have trickle the tickets from one system to another system, so that on the back end, the business process is still working, right? At the same time, you are slowly transitioning to a new system. So having that IT hygiene, thinking about customers, and even if in case of splitting of companies, that would be beneficial. Who takes what, and how you want to manage your new environments, all comes into play. So a lot of moving pieces. So if you design and think about it early, it will be easier in the coming years as well.
Thanks, Nishant, for that. I mean, I think that's, putting the end user and the IT service desk, the people in front and center is really important. You think back to the original analogy, if our room is a mess and we're bringing in some new guests into the house, it's not going to have a great experience. So finding ways to clean up some of the jargon, simplify some of the workflows, and then being ready, knowing that you're not going to have perfect information until that M&A comes through, and then you can go assess the situation and seeing what makes sense and how to roadmap an integration that provides great value to both sides of the acquisition. So that's our number 4. We're up to our number 5 way of improving business agility by cleaning up your ITSM tools. I do want to remind everybody to put in your questions. We're going to get to them next. This one is going to impact everyone, right? You're going into a new year. You want to be able to start your reporting off with the right foot in terms of your metrics, in terms of how you're responding to customers and how you're operating inside the IT service desk. We want to make sure our data is ready to capture cleansed data in such a way that we can do some reporting off of it. So Brian, let's start with you. What are some of the common KPIs that the service desk are using within JSM?
Yeah, so I'm just going to hit some low-hanging fruit here. So your response time to first response, your resolution time, customer satisfaction or employee satisfaction scores, and probably the most common is SLA, service level agreements, would be KPIs that you definitely want to consider.
Okay, and let's take that to the next step. How do we know that some of that KPI reporting is a mess? What does that look like?
Yeah, so some of the examples are like wait states with the end user may get long, or you might see tickets that are not getting assigned. Like we mentioned before, we also talked about ticket assignments changing more than once, several times over the life cycle of that ticket. There might also be some challenges with the data that you are or are not capturing. So there might be missing data, or you might be getting bad data. So for example, if agents open tickets on the back end, then not through the portal, that is, that they might not enter some of the data points that you're really using for these KPIs. And then another example might be complex or over-engineered workflows. So anybody that knows me knows that I love simplification. So the more we can simplify in general, the better.
So what I think about here is, are you ready to go show your CIO a report straight out of JSM around these KPIs? Or are you going to be, tucking your head down saying, the data isn't cleansed enough, I got to bring it out into another platform to clean up missing data or to clean up inconsistencies? I know that's a problem when that happens, and that's something that we want to really focus on. I know we want to have at least some of our metrics, whether it's customer satisfaction scores or employee satisfaction scores, something that's giving us an indication about how we're servicing our end users. Our sponsors are going to be asking us that question. What's your response time? How fast can you resolve certain types of tickets? And then we want other KPIs that are really around how we're operating inside the service desk. Where are there opportunities to make things more efficient and more reliable and to provide great services to our organization? There's another variable here, Nishant, that you talked about earlier that I'm going to bring back in. We want to be able to leverage our CMDB to be able to get some context, right? And we talked about the CMDB, it's never cleansed up enough. What can we do with that to make sure that it's ready to be a part of the entire workflow, but also to give us good data about where we're seeing the most requests and the most incidents?
Sure. Yeah. So this is a tough one, right? So most companies, like most organizations, they all may have CMDB, right? Most enterprise does. And oftentimes what I have seen, they connect to multiple data sources, they bring in data. So, and oftentimes it gets messy. It does get messy, right? You have a lot of data in your CMDB and you do not know what to do with it. Sometimes you have a lot of orphan assets out there. How do you clean it up? How do you normalize your data? How do you reconcile it, right? So so having the right amount of data. So I always ask a customer, don't don't bring everything from your source. Bring the relevant information, and then use those information diligently. All right. So, and then that will complement your practices. Let's say change management, right? You could look at the changes against your service, right? And you could also look change by risk. How to calculate your overall risk based on the service or the asset, for example. So even that will help you in incident investigation because you know that there's a change against that service. How do you close that gap in meantime to resolve? So all these practices go hand in hand, and it's very vital to have a very efficient CMDB in order for that to be successful.
Thanks, Nishant. And Dan, I'm going to give you the last word here. You've done a lot of work with clients around this. You know, you want to make sure your environment is ready to handle all these things going into next year. What are some of the things that you're going to do here to make sure that we're ready to report on KPIs effectively?
Yeah, it's nice to be checking your reports inside of JSM. It comes with several metrics out of the box. We're finding that a lot of people need dashboarding, though. Going that extra level, doing some custom JQLs and putting it onto the dashboard to expose how are the teams working, what's the load looking like, bringing forward some problem areas. As Brian also mentioned, simplifying workflows, helping the users know where a ticket should go next. You know, too many steps in a workflow can cause confusion and slow down that resolution. Enforcing the ticket assignment. You know, are you seeing those tickets sit? Let's get that round robin going, or, you know, institute some type of quick response to your SLA by saying, hey, we need to respond to these tickets in 5 minutes and these in 10, and have the team encouraged to pick up and move forward. You know, it really comes down to that regular audit. We're not going to roll out a perfect JSM the first time, but step back, watch how it's working. And as Nishant said, let's improve, always continue to improve. And in ISOs, we look to help our clients do that.
Thanks, Dan. And you know, just remind everybody to give us your questions. I'm going to do a quick summary now so that everybody walks away with their 5 ways to improve business agility by cleaning up your ITSM tools. First and foremost, look at this from what's slowing you down, particularly about what's impacting employees. Let's be customer focused, employee focused, and saying, where can we be easier and more efficient? Very often that's around cleaning things up. Let's not also think short term, what's going to be impacting only the next few weeks. Let's look at what are some of the things that can improve our onboarding, our ability to do workflows, our ability to use automations. Those are things that we can plan for now that might have impacts over the next year. As we're thinking about cleaning this up, we talked about M&A and consolidations. Let's get the home base cleaned up first, and then let's get into how do we enable it going forward. So we might clean something up and then ask a question like, how do we use automation or clean something up, or how do we make something more self-service? Simplify the services and the data models and the forms and things like that. You know, if you're in that category, you've had 8 or more fields, I might look at using forms to create form-specific areas for the types of problems. I might think about using portals to do things. If you don't have enough fields and you're finding that your requests are taking too long to get routed around to the right groups, you might think about more categories around this. And then focus your KPIs on those 2 areas. First on something around your customers, your employee satisfaction, how you're servicing them, and something around how you're operating efficiently inside. Before we get to our questions today, I just want to let you know a little bit more where you can get more information around this. ISOS has 2 white papers they're sharing with you. You can see the URLs here. The first one on practical recommendations for cleaning and organizing both Jira, JSM, and Confluence. Today, we largely concentrated on JSM, but obviously, as if you're working across these different platforms, there's a lot of opportunity to create automations, knowledge flow, self-service service across all of these. And the second one specifically to Jira Service Management, a modern ITSM solution for an evolving IT landscape. That's one of the things I love talking about, because so much of IT has changed before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and we're looking at a very interesting couple of years ahead of us in terms of how we're becoming more efficient as an organization. So let's look at our questions at this point. There is a question here for Dan. Dan, just question here. What are some of the common automations being used to clean up JSM, or just in general in JSM implementations?
Sure. In the automations for JSM, we would set up SLA breach warnings. So we want to send out a notification to the people that need to be aware of, hey, this ticket is close to breaching, whether it's first response or being resolved. Get the people involved. Also, it's out of the box, but not necessarily turned on. Whenever you're having a conversation with your end user, you can have an automation that says, if the agent makes a comment, we're going to move the status to waiting on the customer. And when the customer responds, it comes back that we're waiting on the agent. And so helping move the ticket through the workflow and not making so many clicks on the users.
Thank you. Nishant, there's another question here. This is actually a question I've always had in mind. Projects inside JSM, how should they be used? How do I know, is it one project or is it 10 projects? What's the right way to think about projects within JSM?
Yeah, I get this question a lot. Nishant, do you have one service desk to funnel all your tickets from? I would say no. Design your service. So determine when you need a service desk, when you need to create a new project, right? So I spoke about this team-centric. So for example, let's say 2 years ago, we had COVID happening, right? So COVID happened and we needed a service desk to service our employees to know where they should get their materials from, or laptop from, or chair from. I stole a chair from my office, for example. So do you create a new project for that? Or do you put that in your facilities project or your HR project, right? So determine that and use it diligently, because you don't want to increase your number of projects. When you increase your number of projects, what does get increased? Number of workflows, number of fields, number of all the other permission schemes, everything gets increased. And also it may bog down systems. So have the right balance and determine if it's the right, or if you have a need, determine if you need to join a project which is already there.
So Nishant, a couple of kind of rules I'm hearing out of that. If you have really two different organizations, HR, marketing, IT, probably few dependencies and routing tickets between them, and different questions, different groups managing them. I might do that with 3 different projects. I might have projects, if I am geography based, different service desks in different geographies doing different types of services. I might use it there. So I'm trying to minimize the dependencies, and that may be a good reason to create projects. Dan, what about services, right? If, do I create 1,000 services and make them really micro, not to borrow the microservices term, but do I think of them as small services, or do I think of them in macro? What's the right way to think about services and their service levels?
Typically, I'd start with the macro level. Start high, keep it simple and broad to be able to address it. And as you find that you need to refine it and get smaller, then start breaking it down. It's kind of automations. Quite often we recommend do the process manually and then automate what you see the need. I would take the same approach with services. Start with a large picture and then slowly break it down until you get to just the right level. And it'll feel right, if that makes sense. But step at a time.
Keep it simple is what I'm hearing from Dan. We're up at the top of the hour, so I want to take a few minutes to thank our sponsors for this webinar. This is ISOS Technology and Atlassian. I want to thank my panelists, Dan, Brian, Nishant, you were great. There is a question that just came in. I'm not going to have enough time to answer this, so I just want to make sure the folks at ISOS see this. We will follow up with you at another time right after this, hopefully, with your answer to your question. So sorry, we're not going to be able to get to that. Everybody have a great holiday if you're in the United States. Have a great weekend coming up. And remember, there's no better time than now to get your environment ready, your IT service management environment cleaned and ready for the future. A lot of change coming in 2023. So I'm sure taking the time now to get your environment cleaned up and working with your partners, working with ISOs and Atlassian to be able to help you do this. Thank you for joining today's webinar and have a great day.